So it's a little bit windy out here. We got some stormy conditions happening, so I wanted to take you for a quick little tour around the marina and do a bit of a how to and how not to secure your vessel. First example here, we've got a large sailboat. I love the rope lines, the rope knot, very nice. Wrapped around the dock a couple times here. But what you will see is a bit of an absence of spring lines here. Let's get this bit of a spring line situation here, but that's pretty much ineffectual. You can see that it's not springing off the lines. One's going straight up and down, which is going to put a lot of vertical force right on that piece of dock and chafe your lines and pull the dock apart in severe weather. This wraps around and comes back. So it's not actually springing, and it's not really doing its job whatsoever, which allows the boat to bounce around quite a bit back and forth, putting way more force on your forward and stern lines. And again, here we have the stern line going directly from the dock right to the cleat, so it's not providing any forward or backwards springing motion. It's just straight back and forth, which puts a lot more force on a short piece of rope, or line rather, dock line. And of course, naturally, the shorter the line, the more force per square foot and per square inch there is, which is going to get to the maximum braking strength much faster than extending the length of line and scoping it out drastically more than this. Here again, we have a situation where you got this dock line straight to the back of the vessel. This doubled up, but again, I prefer to see people wrap their line around the dock a couple times so you don't have this chafing action, because when it's just looped through the dock like this, it's going to saw back and forth as the boat moves and chafe your lines and chafe the dock. Again, a little bit of spring line here, but better than not having any spring line, but it's not as effective as it could be. It's running to the bow and to the stern instead of from a midship. There's nothing really securing a midship here at all, and again, a very short piece of bow line, not very well scoped out, putting a tremendous amount of force on a shorter piece of line. There's a better example of one that has been kind of storm tied on here. So you got it, like I was saying, wrapped around the dock, goes around a couple times there, and it's doubled up, runs to the bow of the boat, and then again from the bow right down to the dock, and then a spring running back. So this is better than a lot that are here tied up. Right, wrapped around the dock a couple times so you don't have the line chafing back and forth and eating the dock up and ripping up your dock lines. So this springs back, which is good, and then one right down to the dock, and then one scoped back further, which is good. And he's also got the chafe guard on the line there, which is going to prevent from eating through the tow rail significantly. Similar again, but I would see you run this line from the stern right back as far over here as possible if I could. I don't like these short little chunks right to the dock like this. He's got a chafe guard there, which is good, and it's wrapped around the dock a couple times. But when you have this short section right here like this, and it's tied real short and tight from the boat right on a pretty vertical angle down to the dock, as these big boats bounce and yaw back and forth, it's putting a lot of vertical force on the dock. It'll pull this shitty old dock apart in no time. Better example of spring lines though, right? So like I say, I prefer to run them a midship like that, but again, if you can go that far, why not go right back, and why not go right forward? And that again reduces the amount of shock that's happening per square inch, and extending your braking point, increasing your braking point significantly. So one straight down, it's okay, but again, like I said, I'd rather see that run back and then have that run. That's pretty scoped well forward. So that's a pretty good example right there of a better tying situation. This is a good example of how I would not set up my shore power, because I've seen these often get pulled over as the boat's bouncing around. It'll pull more and more of this line of the shore power cord into the water, and eventually the weight of the shore power cord itself will just pull the whole length of it right down into the water, and there's nothing securing it at the boat, so it's going to put unnecessary amount of force on the plug itself and cause electrical shorting or damage and other problems that you don't need. So this is an example of a vessel that you know, another big trawler style motor cruiser, and this one, in the last large weather we had, I actually jumped on the back of it and retied it, which I don't like to touch other people's lines, but it was actually pulling so far away from the dock, it was drifting way out, and it was at serious risk of busting either its cleat or the lines or coming free otherwise. So I just jumped on and wrapped the line back around to the cleat there. He hasn't come back and tried to re-secure this since, but I'm not going to mess with it. I just re-secured it. But see, he's got it tied to his stainless steel post there. That it's just a support for the what do you call it? The fly bridge, right? So that's not meant to hold the weight of a boat. You know, that's going to pull right out. It's just a fucking, you know, it's just screwed into the deck of the boat. So this is a really good example of what I was talking about. These short lengths, right, that are just looped around the dock like this, put an incredible amount of force directly onto the dock and on your lines. And it's going to rip either your cleat out, in this case rip your whole support post down, and rip the dock apart. So this boat is one that I'm going to be keeping an eye on for this winter to see pull the dock apart and come free, which is not cool. You know, there are contact numbers on here that if it does come apart, I can try and get in touch with somebody. But you know, these are all things that are preventable if you're paying attention. But here we see zero spring lines, just those real short little loops at the back of the vessel. Nothing springing in. It's hard on the dock, hard on its fenders there. If it really gets rocking back and forth, it's going to do damage to the hull. And this, how effective is that? Right, just a loose loop and then a poor quality dock line here, poorly tied around the dock. It's really not a great example of how you want to secure your boat before you walk away from it for the winter, and this guy's not around, so it's just begging for trouble. Same thing again, you know, these short lines tied right down to the dock, vertical, pulling all this force as the boat's rocking back and forth, vertical force pulling up on the dock. And as you can see, these docks aren't in great condition, so you don't really want to bank on this. And another example of unsecured shore power lines that I'm just asking for trouble. And tight lines are right lines. You'll see the large mega yachts, they'll actually put the vessel in forward and in reverse. You know, they'll tie up and they'll put the stern lines on, for example, and then they'll put the bow lines on. They'll put it in reverse to give you slack on the stern line, tie it tight, and then put it forward or thrust the bow in to bring the bow, give you some slack on the bow, and then tighten it up. And same with the spring lines, right? So they keep the lines real tight, because when this is bouncing around like this, you're just shock loading your lines. So here's a pretty good example of a good scope to the stern cleat there. It's tied across the dock again, so it's not a vertical force pulling up. It's a much better scoped out angle, and you're not shock loading your lines as much or shock loading the dock itself as much, other than it is of hazard to people walking the docks. But it's winter time and this is good. We do have a loose spring line here, but that's, you know, I tighten that right up. He's got it somewhat secured here. It's better than nothing, but I mean, it's a hair tie. And another spring back, which is good. He's double tied at the bow. So that's a pretty good example. But here's an example of what I'm talking about when you gotta, especially the lighter motorboats with a lot of windage, they're bouncing back and forth. This one pulled the dock apart earlier this winter, you can see, right? So when you got vertical shock loading up and down like that, it'll yank those spikes right out of the dock, and this guy almost had his boat float away. It's a perfect example of why you want to scope out your lines right there. Why use dock lines when you can just nail in boards? I will guarantee you these will come apart, maybe even tonight. And this floating dock here will be a goner. There's no lines holding it on at all, really. It's all just screwed down with boards, which is ridiculous. I mean, if that was the way to go, we'd all be screwing boards down our boat. Those things don't have any give at all. As soon as there's any kind of torsion on these boards, they're gonna pop the screws right out and away this floating dock goes. So I mean, I'll come back to you with an update as soon as it lets go. I'll try and videotape it so you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. It's silly things people do. We got an example of a massive commercial vessel with the lines that are just sagging super loose. And I've seen this right now, the wind's on the bow here, so it's pushing it back, but when it winds out of the south and it's pushing against the stern of the boat, you get a ton of movement here. I've seen this boat travel like damn near 10 feet, you know, and it puts a ton of force on this, and you can see right here the lines aren't in really the greatest shape, are they? So here's one that I'll be watching there this winter. My prediction is it's going to get into trouble as well. I mean, they're massive dock lines, right? They're huge, but still they are given to failure. Why would you pull those real right tight? But see, there's all kinds of movement, lots of space here between the vessel and the dock, so it's pulling against and pounding back onto the dock, putting an incredible amount of force. Like you can see actually how much she's moving right now. Okay, there we go. You can see the lines scoped right out now. So all that force, all that inertia coming on and off the dock like this. There's a lot of power coming from these junction boxes here and stretching these power lines. So not really ideal. This is one that is a better example because it is being worked on daily. So I see the gentleman here regularly trying to keep these lines as tight as he can. They're scoped out pretty well. And I've got these absolutely massive dog cleats here. There's my foot by contrast. See these lighter sailboats and motorboats, this one really bounces around a ton. So this one's really boogieing around all the time. And you see how much the bow's traveling in and out there. I mean, it doesn't pick up nearly as much the movement on camera, but yeah, you can see it's moving around a lot, right? And I'll show you exactly why. You got the bow line here scoped out reasonably well, and just this one little, okay, you've got two spring lines on here, but you can see that the spring line's completely ineffective when it's one, tied super loose like this, and two, secured to something that will absolutely rip out. Look at how much this thing's moving around. Right? And then the shock loading on that line when it has to recoil that much. And a big part of the reason, is the spring lines are so poorly tied that it's allowing the boat to travel forward and backwards a great deal, but it's also traveling in and out off the dock a lot. And the reason being is that he's got this short little piece of stern line on here that again is tied pretty much from the stern of the boat right across to the dock. So it's not really holding the back of the boat in close. So the back of the boat's traveling a great deal with no resistance offered by these spring lines. And this is to scope that back 2 or 3 sections back, crank it on tight, tighten up your spring lines, and deal with the damn tarp, because this thing's flapping around making an absolute racket all winter long. You know, novice activity right here. So here's another example of a dock line that is pretty much vertical right up to the cleat on this boat, and you can see exactly what it's doing. It's just eating up this dock. Let's put a lot of vertical force on the dock. And then last but not least, this is our boat tied up correct. So it goes around the dock a couple times. So you have your lines acting as a saw against the dock. So one line forward with the chafe guard on it. And you notice I keep my lines tight. There's really very little slack in them whatsoever. And spring lines. Again, around the dock a couple times. Long scope, right? You see that? Long scope. Shore power is secured so it can't come off my boat, fall in the drink. And there's enough slack there that the boat can move around without pulling the cord out of the terminal. Chafe guards. Long scope again. All the way back. Spring lines again stop the boat from moving forward and backwards, and the bow and stern line prevent the bow and stern from going in and out. A couple times around the dock. Nice chain rope, chain link knot there, chafe guard, and it's tight. And that's how we do.